I hope. So
How about now?
that's better. I think we're good. No more
Okay.
feedback.
Let's hope we don't get that feedback. All
And I'm
righty.
not getting it here, so it's not me either. So I think we might be okay. So go ahead, Debbie, kick us off.
All right, I'm calling the meeting to order, and I want to ask Jared if we have a quorum.
Madam Chair, you do have a quorum.
Thank you. And since we are all online, maybe those members who are here online can introduce themselves.
And what I'll do, Debbie, is I'll just kind of call folks out. I'll start with myself. So I'm Melissa Martz. I'm with the Pikes Peak Area Agency on Aging. And then I will turn it over to Laura Cronick. Hopefully.
She's muted, I think.
I think Councilmember Cronick's feed was the one that was giving us feedback.
Okay, great.
So I don't know if she's diagnosing, but that might also be why she's not coming off mute.
Okay. Well, then I'll turn it over to Rosemary next.
Hi, I'm Rosemary Hedemue with the Alzheimer's Association.
And then Maria.
Good morning. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my camera. This is Maria Cordova. I work at the Independent Center, and we serve Park Teller in El Paso counties.
Great. Vince.
Hello, my name is Vinny Yannick, and I'm with the Department of Human Services here with El Paso County.
Super. And I'll circle it back to Laura, see if she wants to try again.
Can you hear me now?
And it's definitely Laura's. Yes, we can hear you, Laura, but your feedback. So we know Laura is here from the town of Monument. So thanks,
Yes.
Thanks, Laura. And then Bill Bowles. And Bill is with us from Park County. So Bill, if you can unmute at some point, great. But if not, we'll just kind of move along. And then I saw that Jody has joined us.
Good morning, all. Jody Barker, Director of the Pikes Peak Area Agency on Aging. Just so you know, I'll be letting Melissa and Melody lead the meeting. I'm going to turn off my camera and mute, but I'll be available for any questions. Thank you.
And I'd also like to, other staff that are on, of course, Melody, if you can say hello.
Good morning. This is Melody Hanna. Good to see you all.
And then Laura Cruz. Possibly.
Sorry, I didn't have permission to unmute first, so now I do.
All right, thanks. I do see that we have some of our partner agencies who are joining us. I'm not going to go ahead and do any introductions there, but just want to acknowledge that we see that you guys have joined us today and appreciate that. And then I will turn it back over to our chair, Debbie, to take us through our couple of next items on the agenda.
Thank you, Melissa. We're on number 2, which is agenda approval. And I'm wondering if I can get a motion to accept the agenda.
And please state your name if you're making a motion or seconding.
I hear
moved.
motion.
Go ahead.
So did Laura initially do it and then Rosemary seconded? Okay. I hear that clearly. Okay, and can we then have any discussion? And if there's no discussion, we'll take a vote to accept the agenda. No discussion, how about a vote? Maybe raise your hands or say aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
And Madam Chair, just because this is a virtual environment, Robert's rules does allow that you can, instead of asking for a yay, nay, and abstain, you can just ask, does anyone oppose or object to it? And then hearing none, you're more welcome to move forward after that. Just throwing that as an option, you don't have to, but I just want to make sure that given this environment, it's a little more difficult to do yays and nays sometimes.
Okay, let's do that. Does anybody have an objection to approving the agenda? I do not hear any nays, so we will go on. The next thing we're going to do is consent items, and A under there to approve the minutes. Do I have a first and then a second?
This is Laura.
How about a second?
This is Maria. I'll second.
Thank you. And then we will do what Jared said before. Does anybody object to accepting the motion to approve the minutes? And it looks like we do not have a motion, so the minutes are approved. Okay. Jared, do we have any requests for comments?
Madam Chair, we did receive a request for comments during the public comment session. I will ask those who would like to provide public comment to please use the raise hand function. We will use that to determine the order for calling people up for public comment. I will also say we did not receive any written public comment, but we did receive that request for public comment. And I see they are online, so I will go ahead and at least move them into a speaking role. So first, Madam Chair, we do have Joanne Dreyer. I believe I pronounced that wrong, but feel free to correct me if not. But you have 3 minutes.
It's okay. Thank you, Jared. It's Joanne Dreyer. And thank you, Madam Chair and members. I'm Joanne Dreyer with Silver Key Senior Services. I'm excited to share an opportunity that is incredibly valuable for our community. On July 18th, we're using the new conference room at NAMI of Colorado Springs, and we're going to be hosting a mental health first aid for older adults training session. This training is not just for our volunteers and staff, but all community members who want to make a difference in our older adult population. The mental health first aid is vital because it equips us with the skills to recognize and respond to mental health challenges in our everyday lives. Just as CPR helps you to assist somebody having a heart attack, mental health first aid helps you assist someone experiencing a mental health or substance use crisis. Especially with our older adults, this training has become even more crucial as we learn specific strategies to support their unique needs. Everyone who attends this training gains practical tools to help someone who may be struggling and tools that could potentially save lives. Whether they work directly with the older adult population or simply want to be a more supportive neighbor or friend, this training will empower them to make a positive impact. I so appreciate your time and consideration in hearing me on this, and I'm excited to be hosting this training at NAMI.
And can you give us the date and time again?
Yes, it's July 18th, and it starts at an all-day class. It's from 8 to 5 at NAMI, and I do have a poster that I can send or drop in the chat, whichever your preference, that has how people would sign up for it. And I can host up to 30 people.
Great, thank you. Melissa, if we put it in the chat, will it go in the minutes as it will show up in the minutes?
I would prefer actually for you to send that to me in an email, and I will put my email in the chat, Joanne.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Moving on, we're at our presentations section, information items presentation, and we have two people who are presenting today. And I'm just going to mention that the reason why we're doing these presentations today is that as part of our 4-year plan, these kinds of issues were talked about and people had to respond to them. And our strategic review subcommittee is also following through on these and reviewing them and making sure that we're moving towards those goals. So our first presentation is Ms. Sherry Hoffman. It's on unconscious bias, and she is from the PPACG Human Resources. She's a human resources generalist. And then our second presentation is from Mrs. Jennifer Horn. And she is from the Pikes Peak Area Agency. She's a family caregiver support person. And this one is about creating inclusion and intentional spaces. So we'll let Sherry start and go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you so much. I actually had a PowerPoint presentation and went to resave it and it crashed. So PowerPoint presentation for you today, and I am sincerely apologetic for that. I will go over the information that we about unconscious bias. This is a relatively short presentation, so it's really to encourage you to start thinking about unconscious bias because you may not realize you have any. Most people don't, but everybody has them. And so it's just a short training again. And I'll be happy to answer any questions once we're done. So unconscious bias is the stereotypes, prejudices, preferences that cause us to favor a person, thing, or group in a way that is usually unfair to someone else. We all have unconscious biases, like I expressed. They're usually our mental shortcuts, and they help us navigate our day. They usually help us go through our day efficiently and effectively. And so they're influenced by our backgrounds, our cultures, and our experiences. Biases can be conscious or unconscious, but they're not just limited to ethnicity and race. Racial bias and discrimination bias are well documented, but biases may also exist toward any social group. You could be biased against somebody's age, somebody's gender, a gender identity, physical abilities, religion, sexual orientation, weight, and many other characteristics are subject to bias. Unconscious bias can cause us to behave negatively or discriminate against people. Our unconscious bias develop at an early age. It usually starts around middle school, and then it can continue to develop throughout childhood. Unconscious biases have real-world effects on behaviors, but we can change them. They are malleable, which means that we have an opportunity to reduce those or to minimize the impact that your unconscious biases can have. We find unconscious bias in the criminal justice system, in education, in health and healthcare, just to name a few. So it's important that we start to try and understand what some of those unconscious biases may be in ourselves. Again, unconscious bias arises when we activate our fast thinking and we're trying to quickly filter information. So, but there are lots of different types of unconscious bias. I'm going to go over a handful just to kind of get you a little familiar with ones that you maybe have encountered yourself at some point. One of the biases that is important to be aware of is an affinity bias. We prefer people with whom we have something in common. And so in doing that, you may distance yourself or act cold towards people who just don't get you or are different than you. We also can have attribution bias. This is when we perceive or judge the actions of others more harshly than how we judge ourselves. So I was late today, and I was late because there was a traffic accident and I had to go around that accident. So it made me later to work than I anticipated. But let's say somebody else, one of my coworkers, comes in to work late, and I attribute that to they're just not committed to their job. And so I'm judging them more harshly than I would have given myself credit for. So we can also have experience bias. And part of that, it can also be called confirmation bias. But we just believe that everyone thinks the way that we do, and anyone that disagrees is wrong. So let's say during a meeting with someone, you assume the person you're speaking to knows about all the services that AAA offers. And so you don't offer them everything that maybe as an older American might have access to. So we have to be really careful with that. Just because we know something doesn't necessarily mean somebody else does. And then, of course, we also have experienced, I'm sure, at some point, ageism. Ageism is beliefs that we hold about someone based on their age. So that can go both directions. It could be that you have a coworker or a teammate, and you tell them that they're too young for a certain role because they don't have enough experience, but they are definitely qualified. But because of their age, you exclude them from a position automatically. But you could also think about the fact that sometimes you may have a manager who focuses on giving only younger employees training opportunities, but then limits the training for older employees, which is something that has happened before in many industries, unfortunately. We also can talk about halo effect bias. This is the tendency to use one factor, whether it's positive or negative, to influence our perception of someone in other areas. So you may excuse the poor performance of somebody or somebody being rude to you because they've always been kind to you on every other day. So it's also just giving that person a halo that they're innocent. So they're not capable of doing something bad if somebody tells you about it. So it's really important that we start to learn our own unconscious biases. That's how we're going to be better about them and start to make those changes. Because we can talk about it all day, but we have to address those unconscious biases. So the great thing is that you can start to assess your own unconscious biases. There was a project called Project Implicit, and it was founded in 1998 by 3 scientists. And Project Implicit comprises a network of laboratories, technicians, and research scientists from Harvard University, the University of Washington, and the University of Virginia. They created a test. It's called the IAT, which is the implicit association test. They have various tests on there that you can take. They're super fast to take. They don't take a lot of time, but they help you to examine what some of your unconscious biases may be. And honestly, when you take the test, you may be surprised about some of your own unconscious biases, to be honest. So at the end of this presentation, I'll make sure to send out the implicit association test website to Melissa so that she can send it out to everybody. Okay. But I really encourage you to jump on this site and take a test or a few. They really are great information. So, but some ways that you can start to address it, especially once you know what some of those biases are, is practice self-awareness. Be aware of your own biases so you know when to slow down your thinking. Again, those are some of those quick thinking. And so if we recognize that, we can start to address it within ourselves. Understand the nature of your bias. If you understand where your bias may come from, it may allow you to be more open to changing that bias. So that's really important as well. And then have discussion with others, especially those that are different than you. Sharing your biases may help others share theirs. And of course, you always want to make sure that this is done with an open mind and in a safe place. But if you have people that you can talk to about different biases and learn from each other, it's really important to help address those as well. The great thing is it's never too late to acknowledge your unconscious biases or your conscious biases for that matter, and work on your own thinking. Accepting you have unconscious biases and being willing to address those allow us to grow, and they may help us from inadvertently hurting someone with comments or assumptions. So that's again a really short, quick version of unconscious bias, but I really hope that you guys will start thinking about it and looking into yourselves and pinpointing where some of your own unconscious biases may be. And then make sure that you take some of those tests when we're done today. That I would really appreciate it. They don't come to me. It's a research type of website, but I really encourage everybody to check out the website. Are there any questions I can answer?
So I have a question.
Yeah.
Sherry. So with all of the stuff that's going on with DEI right now in our society, is unconscious bias usually part of that training in DEI? And are we therefore losing a lot of the chances to participate in becoming more aware of our unconscious biases?
I don't feel like that it's I think they should work hand in hand would be my feeling about it. A big part of learning DEI is also that self-awareness piece. And I think that as you start to just become more self-aware of your own actions, it helps you to relate more to other ethnicities, just being more diverse as a person in general.
Yeah, I was concerned because I read in a Washington Post article today that companies, colleges, everybody's just running away from providing any of that kind of training. And I think what you spoke about with unconscious bias is extremely important, and some of the reasons why we're having so many problems in our society today.
Yeah, I think the unfortunate part is that unconscious bias and even DEI have just become really political buzzwords. And I find that really unfortunate because they've been around for a long time. It's just that they're becoming more prevalent because it's important to people. It's more important now than ever to start to be unified and come together and start seeing that equality of people. And I think that makes it hard for some people to address themselves, because that's where usually where you get some of that anger from, is that you don't want to see that in yourself. You don't want to see that that you have unconscious biases. You don't want to see that maybe you think of something that isn't necessarily appropriate, but the great thing is you always have an opportunity to change your thinking and your thought processes and how you react to other people and how you react to the world around you.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'm kind of looking at our attendees to see if anybody's unmuting themselves. And again, this is just for the RAC members. Again, I'm acknowledging that we have providers in the audience today, and I'm grateful that they are there. And I saw the chat from Cynthia that she's looking forward to seeing the survey, the bias survey come out. So we'll get that and forward it to the providers. But again, I'm looking through to see if any of our RAC members want to unmute or raise your hand to make a comment so that Debbie can call on you.
Doesn't look like we have any questions.
Yep. I think we're good to move on.
So let's
Thank you
go.
guys for your time.
Let's go on with Jennifer Horn, talking about creating inclusive and intentional spaces.
Oh, good morning. I'm going to try to share my screen. Is it sharing? Oop. Is it the PowerPoint that's sharing? Can you all see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, we can.
Did we lose you, Jennifer? Or are you just getting prepped?
Screen's there, but we're not hearing you.
Any thoughts, Jared, on what might have happened with Jennifer?
I don't. I'm seeing that she's unmuted and that she's still on the line. Oh, now she just dropped off. So maybe she's going to try to come back in a little bit.
We'll give her a few minutes.
Great.
And I'll defer to the chair, but if we want to, we can forward, and then once Jennifer comes back in, we can try to just circle back to this agenda item.
Great, thank you. We'll move on then to the membership subcommittee. Maria, do we have any kind of an update?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At this time, we do not have an update. We do have we're always looking for new members, so if anyone is interested, please reach out to us. But as of this time, we do not have any updates.
And did we not get a second? We did not get anybody indicating they wanted to be second chair. Is that correct?
As of right now, that is correct. Oh, sorry, Melissa.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in for you, Maria, but yeah, so far we have not had any of our RAC members volunteer for that. And so Bill is our acting second vice chair, but we do not have just kind of a vice chair at this point. Okay.
Next is the strategic.
Oh, Madam, Jennifer did join back in. And Jennifer, I don't know if you want to try to pipe in. She did put a message into the chat.
Yeah, I'll just email out the slides because it seemed as though as soon as I tried to share it, everything completely just kicked me out. So I'm just going to kind of just talk about it. You won't see my face though. So I'll make it quick, as quick as can be.
Well, don't go too quick, Jennifer.
Yeah.
And definitely email me the slides and I'll make sure that I get it shared out and we'll include it in the minutes. So
Okay.
Sorry we're having our technical difficulties, but please just, take your time and, we'll share the slides out. So thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to talk about creating inclusive and intentional spaces. So it's typically meaning for marginalized communities, which are usually those from Black, Indigenous, persons of color, LGBTQIA spaces, as well as other diverse communities from marginalized areas. Let me see. So what's an inclusive space? An inclusive space would be someplace that's non-judgmental. You're promoting diversity. You're also ensuring that the mental and emotional well-being of participants and attendees are taken into consideration before holding these spaces. You're also working at building community and creating an open dialogue. And what's a safe space? again, a safe space would also ideally be non-judgmental. You're also holding that space for those voices of marginalized communities. You're also taking and hearing and listening to those lived and living experiences, but you're not taking those experiences as personal attacks on your person. And also understanding that trauma and its impacts also influence how people come and show up in these spaces. So when you're holding these spaces or creating these spaces, you want to also keep in mind that people's lived experiences, their trauma, their family's trauma, all of that is going to impact how they navigate and what they want to say and how they want to say it. And you also want to ensure that you're listening to learn, you're not listening to react or to have a quick response. So how do you know if your space is inclusive or not? Well, does your space offer a room for marginalized voices? Are you allowing those voices to be heard and express their concerns and their lived experiences, whether or not you can see them? What I like to tell people, like in some of my trainings I do, is, just because you don't see the shackles of oppression doesn't mean that it's not there. So a lot of times it takes a lot on people from our communities, and I say our because I am from a marginalized community, a minoritized community. It tick a lot of boxes in the diversity realm. So for me, it takes a lot on me personally, emotionally, mentally, to put myself out there in these spaces to share these experiences. What is not creating an intentional or inclusive space is by having people challenge your lived experiences. That I can tell you would create more division than inclusion, because the person who's coming and willing to be vulnerable in those spaces and share their experiences and how they're feeling and what it's like coming from these communities, especially if we're looking for outreach or ways that we can be more involved in those communities. If we ask for them to tell their stories, a lot of people say, we want you at the table, come sit at the table, we welcome you to the table. But if I get to that table and I start sharing things of my life and you start challenging me about my lived experiences, I'm going to shut down and I'm no longer going to want to be at that table. And then it seems as, we talk about, you mentioned DEI and how a lot of people are running away from it. Well, this would be wise because you're putting a lot of it on people from the marginalized communities. It's becoming our responsibility to carry this training. It's becoming our responsibility to hold these spaces. And to be honest, we're tired. And so when we're asking other people who want to be allies, use your allyship in a way of your voice is heard more before ours. You can create these spaces and people will more likely respect what you have to say, and they'll less likely challenge the experiences you've heard from others than if it were coming from me, from the marginalized community. So when we're saying you want to create intentional, inclusive spaces, you want to also be aware that what you're asking is for people to be vulnerable, to share those traumas, to sit down and express what they're experiencing and what they're seeing from their perspective and worldview from those minoritized groups and marginalized groups. You want to hear and make action steps and actually work towards making a difference and being more inclusive, rather than asking us to be there just to hear us and then dismiss us. So that would be, I had a slide that has a bunch of resources on different ways, on different websites and different toolkits on how to create LGBTQ inclusive spaces, and BIPOC affirming spaces. You can have your affinity groups, you can have spaces where you can have people where if they identify with the LGBTQ population and you have a number of LGBTQ people in your community and they would like to meet, then you can offer your space, your building, if you have that, for them to meet. It doesn't mean that you have to actively be in there with them. It's just giving them that space to have that inclusion, which I think a lot of people also misunderstand is like, just creating the space doesn't mean you have to actively be in that space. If you're not from the marginalized community and you don't identify with the marginalized community, but you have people in your agency or organizations that do, and you know that they need spaces to talk, then offer that space without being what we would call an overseer, which would come from terms in slavery. And my background is also research in racial injustice and inequity. So a lot of my stuff will always relate back to racism as being a big key component into why a lot of DEI work has been halted and shifted. So I think I crunched it in enough time, I hope. Are there any questions?
Can you give us a specific example that you're aware of an inclusive and intentional space?
So yeah, for me personally, I noticed that there were a lot of Black older women in the working world who were needing space to talk with other Black women in the working world. So I created that space by just getting us all together, and we meet once a month on a luncheon to just be around each other, and we choose different restaurants. One was Luchelle's in Fountain. It's a Black owned soul food restaurant. Another we'll do is a China Cottage, because everybody, you know, we like Chinese food, so we want to go. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a space where we talk about all of the negatives, but it's just being in that space and energy with other people, to where if you do say something, you don't have to explain why you feel a certain way, or explain why you have, I guess the best way I can explain it is like convincing others why I feel the way I feel, even though I know the way I'm feeling is valid. So having those spaces where you don't have to go through those hurdles and have to try to explain why you're feeling the way you're feeling. And Melissa?
Yeah, so Debbie, I have my hand up, and so I'm gonna add on to the question that you asked. So Jennifer, I also wonder if you could share with the American Society on Aging, the RISE group that was created, and just kind of educate us all. Thank you very much. A little bit more about that RISE and how it maybe came to be. I believe you were one of the first cohorts with them, but maybe I have that wrong. Maybe they'd been going for a couple of years, but I feel like you were maybe one of the first. And I'll just preface it by saying that I attended the American Society on Aging conference a couple months ago, and talk about inclusive and safe spaces. I don't know, thousands of people were there. And it was definitely there, it was an inclusive and intentional space for communities to be a part of. And I feel like ASA, American Society on Aging, is really, you know, showcasing how that can be. And so, Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind kind of sharing a little bit more about that as a safe, inclusive space.
Yeah, so I was part of the ASA Rise inaugural cohort. So we were part of the very first cohort that was starting, and it was came about because they realized that there needed to be space for BIPOC leaders in aging, because we know aging, everybody's aging every day. It doesn't end. Nobody's special. Everybody's going to age. And so we want to include those in the field of aging that happen to come from those marginalized communities, giving us a platform and a space to share, to talk, and to kind of grow and learn. So we get mentors. We have different speakers from across the nation that come in at different levels and professionalism that come and talk to us. We're able to speak about what hits our core. So for me, mine is aging LGBTQ older adults and aging LGBTQ Black adults. So being able to focus and have a space and a platform where we can talk about those issues allows more and more people to become more visible and have that representation. And that's the key for me, I think, is important with DEI, is it's the representation piece and showing that there are a multitude of different people out there. It doesn't have to be about race and ethnicity, but it's America. We know everything comes back to race. So another reason why a lot of people don't want to do DEI is because they think it is just simply talking about race. And it makes people uncomfortable because it challenges their own worldviews. But being with ASA Rise, you have a cohort of people where, again, you don't have to explain yourself and you don't have to explain your feelings or reactions to things, because we've all shared that lived experience. They actually just celebrated the cohort 4 yesterday. They did their capstone. So the Catalysts have officially become the new cohort alumni with the ASA Rise. And I found out yesterday we officially had 60 total. That's how many Rise fellows we have now. And they've extended the application process for the ASA Rise cohort from June 30th, I believe, to, I'll double check, but I think it was the second week of July, Melody. throwing that out there because I keep pushing her to also apply for the ASA Rise Fellow program, because I think it is important because it gives you a sense of belonging and inclusion and understanding that in this aging world, we know we have a lot of clusters of older adults from various backgrounds with different types of traumas and experiences, whether they grew up in America, whether they immigrated from America, whether they're military affiliated or not. Having these voices and representation in these spaces allows ASA to actually, make a bigger step. And this conference was the first conference that we held, an Aging While Black Summit, which was important and vital because that just means now we have more stepping stones to then have an Aging While Latino or Aging While LGBTQ or Aging While Asian. And even though we don't like to do these silos, it's still important to understand the unique needs for each of these groups. And until we can identify and realize that, there might be unique needs for each and every one of these groups based on culture, then we may be able to move past the whole race issue and then look at it as aging, as just aging, right? But we can't get there until we have the uncomfortable conversations. And those conversations usually come in spaces that are created to be intentional and inclusive and safe.
Thank you. Questions? I guess I just want to add that personally, I think that the reason it's not that DEI is not happening. I think the reason people are running away is that there's so much. What do I want to say? There's so many people trying to legislate or trying to do things because they think it's something that, as you explained it, it really isn't. And I guess that's I just want to express that personally.
Well, I would also just want to add to keep an eye out now, because now there's new AI tech gurus that are now trying to replace DEI with MEI, which is merit, excellence, and intelligence, which defeats the whole purpose of understanding why we want diversity, equity, inclusion, because then it comes back to the whole zero-sum game of just because I identify as a Black lesbian woman doesn't mean I'm not educated, I'm not intelligent, doesn't mean, I don't have merit, but they're trying to make it be it's either or. So I think it's important in these spaces to also voice it out and correct it again, and let people know, diversity, equity, inclusion isn't just one thing. It's you, Debbie, as in one individual person. You don't represent a whole group of people, but you have your own lived experience and your own worldviews that can be shared within groups that people can take from and learn from, and then we can implement policy change and make it a better living, hopefully, world for people who are aging here.
Thank you. Thank you. No other question? No other questions? Well, thank you for that presentation, and hopefully you'll include that information or those slides so that we can look at that and maybe and think about that, because I think it is very important. So we'll move on, and I think we're at the Strategic Review Committee, and that in that subcommittee, and that's Laura, and I don't know if we have any updates to that at this time.
Madam Chair, we have no updates.
And you're not echoing.
I know.
Okay. And the next area is D, is the TRS subcommittee. And I think that because Jody is, I'm not sure that he's even on anymore, but I think Melody, you were going to talk about that. What's happening with the contract?
Yeah, and that will be the same information as the AAA Director's Report, which is where we are in our contract process. So our new state fiscal year is starting July 1st, and we're doing another 2-year contract period, which is really great. Hopefully that eases the administrative burden on our providers. So we've received back all of the budget updates from our providers, and now we're working on gathering and reviewing their insurance documents. So we're in the final stages. Finance department is reviewing those insurance documents as we speak. Just got an email about that yesterday. So hopefully we'll get our contracts out to our provider next week via DocuSign. So we're gathering electronic signatures. We moved to that a couple of years ago as well, so that our providers who are starting services on July 1st can submit reimbursements starting to that date. So pretty short update, but excited that we're still moving along. I see Debbie, you may have a question.
Do we have an update on those new providers, those possibility for those new providers and what has happened with those folks?
Yeah, so we had decided to hold off on new providers based on not being sure what our allocation from the state and the feds was going to be. That's pretty typical for us to have a delay in our funding. Jody just turned on his camera, so he may have more to add about that.
So we have no idea yet what's happening with.
No, Jody may have something to say about that. I think he wants to answer your question.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Yeah, I appreciate staff stepping in for me. It's a crazy time out here as I'm sorting through my father's affairs, and the phone's just been ringing off the hook as we're getting things wrapped up here, at least for this first phase. But yeah, we have just received our funding allocation from the State Unit on Aging. So there are a variety of steps that we have to go through as we prep for the July 1 start date, which of course is just this next week. There was a very small increase in some of the areas of some of the federal funding, as well as a tiny increase in our state funding. And so we will be looking at that. We do anticipate funding the three projects that we had selected and were approved contingent on the final funding question. And so we are planning to move forward at those recommended levels. However, like Melody said, there are a lot of steps yet to take place. So they will not have technically they will not have a July 1 contract start, but we are moving forward to get them into the system. So now that we have the actual funding numbers, we are moving forward to finalize that. The one area that might look a little different than our traditional contracting system is the care pool transportation. There's been a lot of work by staff and in meetings with the care pool staff leadership to determine the best way to manage that. So we don't have that completely solidified yet, so I won't share anything more right there, but do know that there was enough funding that we will be able to take on those three projects since it was already approved based on or a contingent vote based on anticipated funding. So we're really excited about that to be able to engage with these other folks to provide continued and expanded services in our region. So thanks a bunch for that, and thank you, Melody, for keeping things rolling.
Thank you, Jody, for that update. And you can go right into your director's report.
Melody, jump on in there. I think she really encapsulated already a big part of that. But Melody, if there's anything else you'd like to share, please do take that.
I don't think that I had anything to add. Just that we're reviewing the insurance documents and doing our internal steps. So hoping to send out those contracts for signatures to providers next week. So really excited that we're still on schedule.
Would you give everyone the date for the next provider meeting?
Yeah. So our next quarterly provider meeting, some of you may know we started offering those maybe about 1.5 years ago. We meet quarterly with our providers to provide, and I'm talking while I'm pulling up my calendar, to provide updates on systems, any rules, policies, procedures, trainings, and then also trying to provide an opportunity for providers to network amongst themselves as well. So our next one will be Wednesday, July 24th. And so for our next one, because it's the start of a new state fiscal year, a new contract period, we decided it'd be a perfect time to go over some important training items based on our evaluations this past year, and then also our evaluation with the State Unit on Aging. So if you want to see what the nitty gritty is like, I encourage RAC members to attend that, as we'll be providing a lot of information, and you can kind of have a window into all of the things and all the hoops that our providers have to jump through for this funding. There's going to be some really good information shared.
Is that meeting going to be totally virtual?
Yes, that's the plan at this point because our building will still be closed.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you. And the last thing on the agenda at this point under information items is the RAC chair report. I don't really have a report. I just want to say it's really strange to just do this meeting as an all Zoom meeting, with not being there and not being able to get assistance from folks who are sitting next to me. But I want to thank you all for helping me out with this meeting. I don't think we have any discussion items, which is number 7 on our agenda at this point. And then the last thing on the agenda is our meeting schedule. Our next meeting, I think, is July the 15th. Is that correct? No, maybe not. No, July 25th. A day after the provider meeting, July 25th. And again, it's virtual only. And then our RAC Executive Committee is the first Wednesday of July. And I think we're doing them now at 11 a.m. instead of at 4, if I remember correctly. Is that correct, Melissa?
I think so. We've only done it a couple times. You would think I would remember exactly, but
I've only done it actually once.
yeah, it's 11. Yeah, it's
Okay.
11 o'clock. So,
Okay.
yep.
So hopefully we'll see everybody who heads the subcommittees. And then I think they said I think you noted that the PPACG schedule, and that meeting is that the one that's the 15th? Wait a minute, I wrote it down here. Anyway, you can check that out for their next meeting. Is it July?
It'll be July 10th, Madam Chair. And
Thank you.
Jared, would you remind us, that one actually is going to be hosted in person, I believe, over at the El Paso County Commissioners building on Cascade.
That is correct. We'll still have it as a hybrid meeting, but if you're aware of where the county commissioners held their weekly meetings, it's called Centennial Hall. There's a parking garage behind the building, Office Watch Street. But they will. That is the one meeting that we are keeping in person is the board of directors.
Great, thank you, Jared. And I think that's it, and we'll adjourn our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Debbie, and thank you, RAC members and everybody else. Take care.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Debbie. Good job.
Thanks. Bye-bye.